Hello everybody, welcome back to the 2023 Bochum Pokemon Regional Championships. My name's Ben Kiriakou, joined here on the desk by Costa Diadimos, and Costa's very excited to be here by the looks of things. We've got some absolutely fantastic matches coming up for you now that we're getting to the final couple of rounds of Swiss. We're in round 13 now.
Yep.
Only one more Swiss round before we decide our top 8 cut.
Exactly. Being at the penultimate round of Swiss does have a lot of traits going with it. We're in the situation right now where essentially we're getting to the point where we're going to be seeing a couple of more win and in matches, similar to day one. Normally we don't have that structure. We go straight into top cut in the following turn, but now we do of course have that day 2 Swiss prior to hopping into top 8. And do we have a cracker of a match for you lovely folks?
Yeah, it's going to be a match that we actually managed to see yesterday.
Yes.
With Eric Rios versus David Koutesh. And we're so excited to be seeing the rematch here, of course, between day 1 and day 2. The Swisses sort of reset. It does not exactly how it works, but effectively, usually you can't play the same player again in Swiss tournaments, but with the way that it works, and this time you can play someone day 2, day 1, day 2, and in fact day 3.
Exactly, and I think it's definitely not only myself who would say this or Ben agreeing to it. Bellibolt has a bit of a fan base going at the moment. I think David Koutesh being able to actually get the win on yesterday's stream 2-0 versus Eric Rios, which is something that is not to be taken lightly, especially with an Assault Vest Bellibolt on his team. We didn't actually see it make an appearance yesterday. However, we are completely unsure on whether we actually may see it come in today.
Right, and I definitely do want to see it because it's such a low usage Pokemon, and for David to be making it to this stage of the tournament, clearly it's doing what David intended. He's a player that really does like to use the right Pokemon in the right slot, regardless of what that is, regardless of how popular it is, and that makes David's teams really exciting to be able to showcase, because it's those compositions that, like, they don't make sense when you look at them, but you know they make sense to David.
Oh, yeah, you're like, okay, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, but wait, David's got a whole different level of thought behind it. He's like, okay, all right, I think that fits in quite nicely. I think you mentioned it on stream yesterday as well. David tends to, team building wise, craft around what he thinks is really strong, but then he tries to plug the holes per se in a niche sort of Pokemon that may not be getting as much usage as you'd expect in the current meta.
Right, and it's about how we call it role compression, where you take a Pokemon that's like, okay, so something, in fact, actually, I'm going to have to bring up the I word. Incineroar in previous formats was the Pokemon that did that so well. You get your Fire type, you get your Dark type, all in the same basket. You also get your Fake Out and you get your Intimidate. So you can put Incineroar on so many different teams, and it's probably going to do a lot. That gives you a lot of freedom in the other 5 Pokemon that you bring. I'm not sure if Bellibolt is the Pokemon that's doing that in David's team. I hope it is, personally. But, that's the sort of thought process that goes behind using these more niche picks.
Well, exactly. And David, of course, is facing the previous season's European international champion, of course, last season's Liverpool regional champions as well. Eric Rios is not someone to take lightly. He is such a powerful, consistent player, so being able to see him always in action is complete pleasure. I think most definitely shared between myself and Ben, as well as everyone at home.
Definitely. Before we go into the match and the teams that both of these players are going to be bringing, there is a little bit of extra standings to see where we are in the tournament so far. As you can see, Giuseppe, who we featured in the previous round, is holding that 11-1 record, with Aurelian also holding the 11-1 record, a player that we featured yesterday and is continuing to hold that X-1 record.
Exactly, and from the looks of things, actually 2 rounds ago, I believe Alex Soto was 10-0. Seems like he's actually built up a couple of losses going into the previous 2 rounds. Quite tough, I think, because like we discussed, it's a lot of matchup sort of understanding and comprehension going into each set. However, it's a battle for healthy, for a consistent mental state, keeping your emotions intact, being sure that you want to try to objectively reach those goals that you need to. We don't know the story just yet completely. We heard a bit about it prior, but of course, it'll be quite interesting to actually see how that further develops going into the day.
Right, and I think if I remember rightly, the round before last, Feis and Alex played against each other, and there was a little bit of mind games with a little bit of sucker punch action going on, and Alex fell afoul of that. But then you saw Feis playing against Giuseppe, and Giuseppe had a place in Feis's mind, I think, going through that set, making every single read turn after turn absolutely perfectly, and getting maintaining that X-1 record. Very likely to be making their way into the top 8 cut now. We'll have to see how Alex gets on, because I'm sure Alex really wants this and is going to be able to give it the best go that he can.
Most definitely. I think just being able to see the assortment of all of these various trainers, I think a lot of names that we do recognize, they do have consistent results, and they have a very big impact on the meta as well, through their own team building, as well as the people they team build with, and the influence and circles that they develop, and they start, for example, becoming more used on the ladder, and then all of a sudden someone picks up on it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that tech existed, or I didn't know that Pokemon could survive that move, but it must be trained in a particular way where it's taking that into consideration.
And it is those sort of community aspects that really make a massive difference to getting new players into the game nowadays, because there's so many resources out there available for players to, pick up and like, hey, I want to go and use a team like this. You can have a look on Twitter, have a look online at various platforms, various content creators, and you'll be able to get something sort of close to how you want. One of the best ways is, of course, to just give it a go, use those sort of things on the online ladder, see how you get on with it, and then start making your adjustments to those sort of team compositions that work better for you.
Yeah, exactly that, as we will be seeing the trainers preparing themselves going into this rematch of what it was. Of course, yesterday we did feature David versus, I would say Goliath, but it is most definitely Eric in this case, which is the equivalent of a Goliath when it comes to the amount of experience he has under his belt, as well as multiple regional championships.
Right, and we talked about Eric being the previous European International Championship, but David Koutesh, no slouch either by any stretch of the imagination, a 2-time regional level champion. Of course, there's the Austrian Open, and the Prague Special Event champion, and of course getting top 16 in the World Championships. Now, that is a story to tell, because the team that David Koutesh used was absolutely phenomenal. A combination of Dialga and Yveltal with a Gyarados, which, if you're unfamiliar with the 2022 format, was nowhere to be found. And still, David made it to the top 16. Really, really exciting. Definitely worth a watch.
It really, really is. It just goes to show the level of creativity that we discussed. That was, he explores really deep into analysis of what the current meta is. Whilst on the other hand, I think Eric does have a lot of really good, consistent, good stuff type of Pokemon that he's been able to produce, and make a couple of tweaks along the lines.
Right, and Eric is a player that tends to really flowchart all of the matchups. Eric does his homework.
Yes.
That's definitely how I would describe it. Making sure that going into these big events, he knows exactly how to tackle all of the big compositions that we see in the format. Understands what he needs to do against them and how the game can develop with all of the different choices that we have available in different matches. And when they get to the tournament, it's like, oh, okay, so we're here, we're doing that.
Yeah, exactly that. We're going to be seeing the team over on David's side once again. A couple of highlight Pokemon, of course, has to be that Bellibolt straight off the bat. Let's be completely honest. Assault Vest, Thunderbolt, Sucker Punch, Parabolic, Charge, and Muddy Water. Flutter Mane is Choice Specs. Clear Amulet on Roaring Moon, and I believe we had actually seen this sort of a Photosynthesis plus Sun Weather Core do really, really well. I think Roaring Moon actually, if memory serves correctly, does get a boost, a heightened boost in its attack over on David's Roaring Moon side, as he's able to get even more damage output generated in combination with that Fire Terror type.
Yeah, and looking at the item as well, being that clear amulet, stopping any stat drops as well. So you can't stop this Roaring Moon from doing the damage it wants to deal. The thing that I'm looking at, though, is that air balloon on the Arcanine, because I mean, you know, we've seen some fun teams with air balloon, but not seen it in a team that's doing so well. Eric's team, on the other hand, a little bit more what you'd expect looking at the metagame coming into this sort of tournament. And I'm seeing that jaw lock that we saw multiple times in day one on the Roaring Moon. There seems to be this sort of conversation of like, which dark type move do you use on Roaring Moon? Yep. There's jaw lock, there's Throat Chop that we've seen to good effect that stops things like Hyper Voice working or other moves that are sound-based. But also we've seen some Snarl coming out from some more defensively orientated Roaring Moons. Yeah,
exactly that. I think being able to have a bit of a variety on the Roaring Moon makes a lot of sense. We've also seen Roost used as a utility for recovery, likely to be used over the Protect, of course, because you don't need to fear, or at least you accept the fact that you cannot protect yourself from any oncoming highly damaging move or fake out, whilst in return you have the really nice sort of strategy where you can actually make a read on your opponent playing a bit more defensive whilst you regain HP. So it's a bit of a try for a bait in order to target down that slot to get any unwanted attention, as you don't want it to recover HP.
Right, and yeah, getting to those sort of end games where you've got more HP than your opponent tends to be the favorable sort of position to be in. Just looking at the last thing that I want to call out on Eric's team is that Iron Bundle carrying the Focus Sash, but usually we see Hydro Pump being the move that we drop for Encore, but actually in this case, it's the Icy Wind, giving less speed control option to Eric Rios's Iron Bundle, but there is that Tailwind on the Roaring Moon. So, you know, maybe Eric going into this tournament thinking, hey, do you know what? I can reliably set up Tailwind with my Roaring Moon, and that's going to be enough speed control.
As we are going to be seeing the leads. Get ready, everybody. We've got game one of this Battle of the Titans. Iron Hands over on Eric's side, accompanied by the Amoongus, whilst Roaring Moon and Torkoal on David. So a bit of a similar situation as to the leads with what we saw yesterday. Roaring Moon and Torkoal being opted from David's side there.
Right, and we see a little double target coming. A little bit of a sneak peek at what David's going to be doing, using that Terra Fire, putting so much pressure on the Amoongus. And of course, once you Terra with your Roaring Moon on David's side of the field, the Iron Hands will no longer have super effective fighting damage on it. Usually flying is the Terra type of choice, as it is on Eric's team. But here we are, the little chandelier coming out on Roaring Moon and going to be terrestrializing into the fire type.
A bit of a shout out there to Chandelure, which unfortunately didn't quite make the cut into the game so far, as we are going to be seeing the Amoongus on Eric's side opting to go for that Dark Terror type choice there. I think it's quite nice to be able to actually see both of the trainers going straight in for the pressure. And talking about pressure, we've got the fake out into the Torkoal. Will flinch it for the remainder of this turn. Roaring Moon from Terra Blast from the Roaring Moon goes into the Amoongus, and because of that Terra type change there, the Amoongus will be able to survive whilst it actually recovers a tiny bit of its HP there via the Citrus Berry. And as a direct result, we're going to be seeing the Spore retaliation into the Roaring Moon. We'll be putting that Pokemon now to sleep.
A safe fake out coming out from the Iron Hands here into the Torkoal, which doesn't have the ability to protect. it could have circumvented that fake out with a helping hand. But then you kind of have to predict that the Roaring Moon isn't going to be attacking that turn if you're on Eric's side. So I really like the double up there into the Amoonguss slot, but unfortunately just a sleeping Roaring Moon in its place, taking a lot of damage from that wild charge.
Indeed, of course, hitting neutral there, as we're going to be seeing Tortor go for the overheat, and it just goes to show the testament of Iron Hands being so bulky with that assault vest, whilst the Tortor is now going to be joining its partner and taking a little nap as well.
And the question is whether this Roaring Moon is going to be waking up anytime soon, or if the Iron Hands and the Amoonguss get the opportunity to go for some more offensive options. Eric can opt here to go for the Pollen Puff and heal up that Iron Hands while that Roaring Moon continues to take a nap.
Indeed, because it did take the mandatory turn of sleep in the previous turn, however, did have a chance to wake up. But we do not even see it have the chance any longer to wake up, as it does get KO'd by that wild charge. So even though Iron Hands is very bulky, we have stressed this multiple times, it is very good offensive outlet when it comes to its positioning. Those same type attack bonuses on the wild charge as well as the drain punch really add to its longevity as well as offensive pressure. Pollen Puff combination there, being able to bring it straight back up to full HP.
And that's exactly where Iron Hands wants to be when the Fluttermane comes in. That Fluttermane is carrying the choice spec, so it's going to be doing a lot of damage. Can go for the Moonblast here, and especially with Amoonguss being the Dark Terror type, is going to be under a lot of threat here.
Indeed, as it is going to be switching out for the Great Tusk right now, allowing, of course, this Fluttermane to be able to dispatch a very, very powerful move right now, likely to be the Dazzling Gleam, of course. I think Eric takes that into consideration. Switching the Amoonguss out will be able to activate its Regenerator ability, get a tiny bit of HP back, as well as we do actually see Arcanine quite nicely timed for the switch in there. Will get an Intimidate off onto the Great Tusk, and Dazzling Gleam not quite able to deal as much damage as I would have liked. The Arcanine being an absolute optimal switch there. Wild Charge brings that Fluttermane down within range of just nearly any hit to be able to pick up the KO.
And Dazzling Gleam is not likely to pick up the KO on Iron Hands this turn. I mean, sometimes you look at Iron Hands and you're like, that Pokemon's just not fair. it just takes too much, or too little, should I say, damage from those big attacks, especially with Fluttermane carrying the choice specs. It's like, hang on a second, isn't that meant to actually do some damage?
And I think Iron Hand sometimes, I forget, I'm like, okay, it has a Terror type, is that why it didn't take that much damage? But no, it actually hasn't, it is still the fighting type, even if those were super effective moves coming out from that Fluttermane.
Right, but this Great Tusk coming in is probably going to be able to knock it out there. Dazzling Gleam coming in from the Fluttermane doesn't pick up the KO, as we were saying, onto that Iron Hands. Headlong Rush following up onto the Arcanine on Eric's side of the field, so this Arcanine not trained to be as speedy as Great Tusk on David's side of the field, and with that Great Tusk carrying a Focus Sash is not going to be broken this turn because Iron Hands going for the Wild Charge and knocking out that Fluttermane.
Indeed, so a bit of a trade there of KOs from both sides of the field. The Iron Hands doesn't actually go down to its own recoil there. I think it's very, very close in doing so, and we did actually see the weather for Sun expire. Torkoal will be now bringing it back onto the field as Iron Bundle is the Pokemon of choice in the back for Eric. And I think, like you said, you made a very good point there, the fact of the training in speeds and the interaction between the Great Tusk and the Arcanine, allowing the Great Tusk to just go ahead and pick up those vital KOs.
It definitely wants to maintain its Focus Sash in front of an Iron Bundle because especially after a defense drop, or a special defense drop in this case, from its Headlong Rush, it's going to be taking basically all of the damage, and Focus Sash is the only thing that's going to be helping it to survive into the next turn, hanging on with 1 HP. So yeah, really like the speed interactions there for David. Eric bringing in the Iron Bundle. We know it doesn't have Icy Wind, and therefore won't be able to lower the speed of any Pokemon on David's side of the field, namely this Great Tusk.
Indeed, as we do see it pick up the KO there, of course, allowing even further room for David's Pokemon to be able to navigate around Eric's threats. Freeze Dry does bring the Great Tusk now down to its focus sash. Of course, we are in the sun, so there is no chance for it to be frozen, as Tortle is going to be burning off an additional turn of sleep.
Right, and the Amoonguss being the last Pokemon left is in a prime position to be able to redirect the attacks away from the Torkoal. This Torkoal only has the opportunity to go for Overheat and Clear Smog. Overheat, a move that drops special attack stats when it gets used. So if it doesn't knock out the Amoonguss in one, then it's going to have to use maybe like 3 to be able to knock out the Amoonguss. And Iron Bundle is pretty safe to just keep targeting down that Great Tusk. There's no other control options that David has on his side of the field to be able to deal with that.
So Amoonguss opting to go for the redirection there makes a lot of sense. Close combat, however, because it is now a dark type, will be taking that damage super effectively, but not actually going down to a KO there. Freeze Dry actually being the choice of move from Iron Bundle, maybe likely to not want to miss any sort of icy winds, as Tortle does now wake up, does connect with the Overheat, and it does pick up the KO.
Now, I must admit, I missed the speed interactions there with the Great Tusk and what the photosynthesis boost was, because, my God, the attack stat on Great Tusk is like, hang on a second, like that's always going to be attack, isn't it? But no, in the way that David trained it, and this is exactly the way that David goes about playing Pokemon, it was the speed boost.
I think it may have been the interaction of the Intimidate that actually technically brought the attack lower of a range as opposed to the speed. So it's very cool to see that sort of interaction with the Sun at play and Photosynthesis, as Overheat from Tortle does try to target down the Iron Bundle, now at -2 of its special attack, of course. The Iron Bundle just wants to stall out the turns of Sun that do remain.
That makes such a difference here. Encore coming out into the Torkoal slot is going to lock it into the last move that it used, which is that Overheat. Now at 2 stages of decreased special attack, but boosted by the Sun, is doing so much damage. And Costa, correct me if I'm wrong, but that looks like that Iron Bundle is in KO range right now.
It does, whilst the Sun is still in play, most likely. We do, of course, have to take into consideration the additional negative special stages applied to this Tortle. I think Eric's strategy here is just wanting to stall out the Sun in order to allow the Hydro Pump to connect into the Tortle and pick up the KO from Eric there, giving him that well-earned game 1.
Now, Eric's got to be feeling really happy about that, because David managed to defeat Eric 2-0 in their previous set in day 1. It's taken 3 games, but Eric's found a way to take a win in this set, and this is why it's great to showcase a rematch, because after you walk away from those sets and you take a loss like that, you're going to be thinking, hey, hang on a second, what did I do wrong here? Like, what can I improve in my game plan? And this is the result, right? If you caught day 1 already, you'll have known how the game between David and Eric went. And it's clearly very different from what we saw previously.
This is a sort of point where you have to give a lot of respect to these high caliber trainers in their information processing and adaptations based on what they had experienced in, let's say, any previous sets, information gathering. I think Eric did a really good job in identifying how to navigate himself around David's Photosynthesis Sun Core in such an excellent way.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm looking at this, thinking about how these players are going to be adjusting for day 2. We're already in day 2.
We are.
We're going into game 2
Yes.
here. And I'm just looking longingly at that belly bot, but unfortunately I don't think it's the right bring with the Pokemon that Eric brought to the match. You've got that Iron Hands that resist it. You've got the Amoonguss that sort of can resist it, but maybe it doesn't, depending on whether it goes for its Terror again. You've got the Arcanine there that's probably not going to be as effective against, but it would be very good against the Iron Bundle, and would be very good if David predicts that the Roaring Moon is going to be coming out for Eric's side.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a niche that you could try to find a way to fit it in the 4 Pokemon that you're going to be bringing in this game too. However, David, I think he's just needed to make a couple of better turns that Eric was just able to get that additional step up from him in his experience with yesterday's set. And he was able to just capitalize off of the moments where David David's board state wasn't as well as he would have liked in order to enable his very fast offensive Pokemon in the back from just sweeping, because that's sort of the strategy of that main 4 core coming out from David's side.
Right, and looking at the 4 that David brought last time, I'm wondering if there's an argument for Arcanine to join the battle here for David's side of the field as well, because it's such a consistently good Pokemon and would do quite well into this sort of position. So here we go. We'll see the Torkoal leading out with the Great Tusk, and the Photosynthesis activating it is indeed the attack, so you were absolutely on the money there. The attack drop from the Intimidate was the thing that caused that speed boost. Iron Hands and Amoonguss, though, leading out for Eric.
Indeed, as this is a better lead, I would say, from David's side. He recognizes the Iron Hand role in Eric's strategy in order to trump him out. So being able to directly threaten it from the get-go is really, really nice. Of course, we know that the Focus Sash item is the one of choice on Great Tusk, so it is not immune to any sort of spores. However, there is a scenario I can think of about terastallization into the Grass type.
Yeah, that's a really different Terra type for Great Tusk. Most players opting for that Terra Ground to do so much more damage, but the Grass type is just going to allow David to ignore any moves coming out from that Amoonguss. One thing he's going to have to worry about, though, is the Pollen Puff on Eric's side of the field. Now that's going to do super effective damage where once it would be resisted. That combined with the low special defensive stats on Great Tusk is something that David's going to have to be watching out for. Fake Out, though, does break the Focus Sash onto the Great Tusk, stopping it from moving this turn. Overheat retaliating into the Amoonguss and doing quite significant damage, but because of that Terra Dark, it was able to survive and not get the Spore off into that Great Tusk.
Exactly. A couple of key things to note there. It seems that David wanted to opt to go for the very offensive play of just ignoring the Fake Out, wanting to try to get damage off if possible. However, the Amoonguss did actually get outsped by that Torkoal, which suggests that David's Torkoal is not at the most minimum speed that it can be trained at. It has a tiny bit of speed involved, maybe in order to outspeed those types of Amoongusses.
And Amoonguss definitely worried about what's going to be coming next as a headlong rush launches its way into Arcanine on the switch-in and is enough to pick up the KO. What a massive turn there for David as Arcanine returns there to Eric. Drain Punch, though, coming into the Great Tusk and healing a little bit of health from the Iron Hands.
And the Yawn coming out from the Torkoal into the Iron Hand slot will now be putting a sort of sleep timer potential onto the Iron Hands, potentially forcing Eric to have to switch it out the following turn. We do know, of course, it does have a Volt Switch as an option. Something to take into consideration, the Great Tusk is no longer a ground type, so if there's any sort of reason to go for a Volt Switch into that slot, you most definitely can do it.
Right, into the Torkoal as well would definitely be an option. Iron Bundle coming in here, putting on a lot of offensive pressure. Freeze Dry still super effective regardless of if it's ground type or the Great Tusk has gone as it has for the Terra Grass. But in the sunlight, isn't going to be able to put so much pressure onto Torkoal. The thing I'm worried about for Eric is there's not many Pokemon for him to be able to switch back to.
As we're going to be seeing the Fluttermane switching in now for what was that Great Tusk, and will, of course, profit off of the Photosynthesis, heightening its speed. Freeze Dry goes into that slot there. It will be dealing a good amount of damage. Once again, because the sun is up, you cannot freeze that Pokemon currently. Volt Switch does target into the Torkoal, deals a tiny bit of good damage onto that slot, whilst of course allowing Eric to pivot straight into the Amoonguss, and we see that Regenerator ability activation come into play. Yawn, however, goes into the Iron Bundle. Now it's starting to feel a bit drowsy as well.
And if I wasn't looking at all of the Pokemon on the field, I would think, like, hang on a second, are we playing VGC 2022 right now with all of these Yawns coming out? But we can see why it's such a good strategy, forcing switches, forcing Eric to decide, like, okay, am I going to stay in and fall asleep, or am I going to just switch out my Pokemon?
Exactly, as we're actually going to be seeing a very interesting play from Eric's side there, switching the Iron Bundle out, knowing that the Fluttermane will be outspeeding Helping Hand will be coming up from the Torkoal, assisting the Fluttermane. This is going to be a lot of damage here, Ben. Dazzling Gleam, of course, will not be landing into the Amoonguss due to the Protect. It will into the Iron Hands, and that, for the first time ever, looks like a 2-hit KO onto Iron Hand.
Yeah, with the Helping Hand definitely going to be boosting up to a position where Eric has to worry. But that Sunlight is running out, and with the Sunlight running out, that means that both Hydro Pump is going to be back to its original power, but also that the Fluttermane is going to lose that speed boost from Protosynthesis. So, yeah, you've got to sort of bide your time here as if you're Eric, as he's doing with that switch into Iron Bundle.
Indeed. Helping Hand coming out once again onto Fluttermane, the fastest thing on the field, and apparently the most powerful one as well. Picks up a KO onto Amoonguss and does, of course, bring that Iron Bundle down now to its Focus Sash.
Right, and with the Iron Hands being the last Pokemon in the back, it will be able to come in and put some fake-out pressure onto David's side of the field. Only hitting that Torkoal, though, and with the Sun leaving the field this turn and that speed boost being removed from the Fluttermane, definitely a turn where David's probably going to want to reposition just to get that last Dazzling Gleam off that will probably be able to pick up a knockout on both Iron Hands and Iron Bundle.
David actually opting to switch the Fluttermane out as opposed to the Torkoal. Oh, wait, no, I take that back. It's going to be a double switch.
Switches for everyone.
It's like he heard me. Yes, because it makes sense to try to preserve the Torkoal in the back in order to have a future turn with the Sun reset. Hydro Pump actually misses the Great Tusk, whilst we're actually going to be seeing the Drain Punch target down the Roaring Moon, which did just arrive on the field for super effective damage and a super good amount of recovery of HP there.
And I love that turn actually for Eric, because that Drain Punch takes it out of takes the Iron Hands out of KO range of that Dazzling Gleam in the next turn, and now Iron Bundle is free to get a KO onto that Great Tusk.
Yeah, not great anymore. It is out for the count in Game 2. That is why Iron Bundle is such a threat. Breaking Swipe, however, it's gonna do the deed, pick up the KO onto the Iron Bundle, which already put in a lot of work. From Eric's side will be, of course, dropping the attack of this Iron Hands to -1, but at that little of HP range, not going to be as effective as David would have liked. The Roaring Moon is also out of this game.
Right, now the Torkoal and the Fluttermane can come back. They're going to be effectively resetting up the Sun. Not that the speed is needed by any stretch of the imagination for the Fluttermane, but now Fluttermane can go for the more powerful Moonblast into the Iron Hands. Now, if that's not enough to pick up the KO, the Overheat, as long as it connects with the Iron Hands, and it's pretty likely to, will likely be enough to pick up the knockout here. Any health recovery that you get from Drain Punch is just not going to be quite enough.
And that was indeed an excellent pin from David's side. We do see Eric conceding that Game 2 as Helping Hand and Moonblast, of course, would have been more than enough to be able to finish off the job.
Right, and yeah, we're getting to see a Game 3 coming out here with these two players. Love to see that, especially in these later stages of the tournament. You want to see these players like adjust and see how the different scenarios really pay off for both players as they go through Game 1 into Game 2, and now it all comes down to this, Costa. So looking at what we've seen already in Game 1 and Game 2, what are you expecting to see from Eric in Game 3?
I think from his point of view, he did a really good job in order to dispatch of the Great Tusk in a really good manner. I think his board state was excellent in order to try to do the best that he can. However, David, on the other hand, did really utilize that Fluttermane and Torkoal. Torkoal switched in, I think, several times there in order to get that Sun up. That is the #1 key thing for David in order to extend his longevity in having these boost interaction onto all of his photosynthesis-based Pokemon. Roaring Moon didn't look like it did that much, but it sort of allowed a scenario where the Fluttermane could sweep from the back. So from Eric's side, I'm not 100% sold on that Dark Terror type in turn 1 from the Amoonguss, because it opens up a level of play where David could take advantage of it going towards the mid game, which Eric isn't able to sort of make an instant sort of reaction based on what current Pokemon are on David's side, because they're so offensive.
Right, we'll have to see as the Roaring Moon and Great Tusk appear on David's side of the field. The same lead from Eric, though. Iron Hands and Amoonguss coming into the fray here, and we'll have to see again Spore targets. We know that there is a grass type terrestrialization. There's also a sneaky move there on the Great Tusk on David's side of the field, and that's that Taunt, which is going to stop the Amoonguss from going for any Rage Powders or redirecting any other attacks here as well. So really like to see that sort of adaptation and sort of strategy coming out from David, just finding a way to remove one of those big threats.
You allow for more options in order to shut down Eric's Pokemon, which we know are going to be outsped by both the Great Tusk and the Roaring Moon. However, David is actually going to be switching that Great Tusk out for the Torkoal. So this seems to be a bit of a bait play from David in order to get that Protosynthesis boost on the Roaring Moon, which of course does heighten up that attack to be absolutely powerful going into this combination, because you're kind of forcing Eric to decide which Pokemon is either going to terrestrialize or which slot is going to be used in order to bring that Torkoal in.
The question is whether we're going to see a Terra again in Game 3, or whether the Amoonguss is going to just take a little bit more of a risk and stay in a Grass and Poison type. We're going to see a Terra again into the Dark type, so won't be able to be knocked out this turn from the Roaring Moon on David's side of the field.
So it makes a lot of sense to consistently keep that going. Fake Out actually goes into the Torkoal slot, so good read there from David in order to establish his plan on getting the Sun set up. Spore was so free to go into the Roaring Moon, as of course the attack did come out from Roaring Moon there, perhaps expecting a switch out from the Iron Hands.
I think it's really safe to always go for the Spore into the slot that doesn't have the opportunity to go Terra Grass, because you're definitely not going to fail it. Of course, with free attacks and protect, there's no opportunity for David to go for any sort of boosting options with that Roaring Moon, so a nice Spore target.
Indeed, as Wild Charge is going to be going into the Roaring Moon, actually dealing more than half of its HP's worth, as we're going to be seeing Torkoal going ahead and setting up the Yawn Cycle strategy. Spore does go into that slot and will be putting it instantly to sleep, actually showing Torkoal how the business is done.
Yeah, Yawn is a little bit of a slower form of getting sleep, and we're seeing why Spore has been so popular in VGC over the years, and especially now that we've seen the Terra on the Roaring Moon. There's no Terra Grass opportunity for David, so if Eric is able to predict where these Pokemon are going to be switching, it could be all of David's Pokemon being put to sleep.
It could indeed. It's a really cool way to actually start slowing down the momentum on David's side. Volt Switch, actually going into Amoonguss, maybe not wanting to play the game of, I wonder which slot the Great Tusk is going to actually switch into. I'm just going to make a safer play. I'm just going to Volt Switch into my own partner Pokemon that will always have a guarantee of slowly bringing the Arcanine in whilst not actually risking any sort of predictions.
Yeah, I mean, you can always Volt Switch off of the Torkoal in that situation. It doesn't have the opportunity to go for a Protect, but it can't wake up anyway, and the Fluttermane takes a Spore. So that's 3 out of 4 Pokemon on David's side of the field asleep, and definitely a position that Eric is favored in.
It really is. I mean, it's most definitely legal based on the rules as well, so it's a really cool way to actually slow down the momentum from David's side, because we said the offensive pressure is the main sort of crux to David's strategy. You want to be able to just do the best that you can to force control the board state into your own advantage.
Right, and Fluttermane remaining asleep this turn, taking its guaranteed tick of sleep. Flare Blitz launched out from that Arcanine is in the sun, able to pick up the KO onto the Fluttermane that did so well against the Iron Hands in the end game of Game 2. It's looking really promising here for Eric, as Torkoal does stay asleep. And a Spore launching out into probably the Flutter main slot. You kind of go for a Flare Blitz. If it knocks it out, great. If it doesn't, and if it switches into something like Great Tusk, then the Spore's going to be a follow-up and put that Pokemon that switched into to sleep as well.
Indeed, as we have Great Tusk now on the field, I can confirm it is not asleep right now, as opposed to all of David's other Pokemon. We got Arcanine. We know the interaction that the Great Tusk does outspeed this Arcanine, so likely there could be a play of a Rage Powder here to redirect the close combat. I think David may be well aware of this. Will likely go for it, try to target it down, but no, was actually trying to go for the play just in case there was no Rage Powder based on any sort of predictions that could have been at play. As, of course, we see the defenses once again drop on this Great Tusk, and a Citrus Berry Recovery being able to add a tiny bit more of longevity to this Amoonguss. Flare Blitz goes into the Great Tusk, does deal great amount of damage, does not get any sort of burn, but the Torkoal does wake up finally, actually targeting Yawn into the Amoonguss slot. You need to try to put a stop to this sporing business over from this Amoonguss.
Right, and there's two things that are really significant in this position. Both Great Tusk doesn't have the Earthquake option to go for spread damage here, so that Arcanine can be quite safe in front of the Great Tusk with the Rage Powder there. But also, there's no extreme speed on the Arcanine here, so something has to take an attack in order for the Great Tusk to go down, but it won't be going down at the moment. Eric winning the set with David, realizing that there was no way to come back in this moment and forfeiting against Eric. So in the rematch, Eric reigns victorious.
Really does versus Sun, which was very impressive to say the least from Eric. I think he recognized the strategy of being able to just quite literally slow everything down by putting everything to sleep. It really worked out quite nicely for him there. I think there was a turn 1 in Game 3 where we actually saw the Throat Chop targeting into the Iron Hands. I'm not sure if that may have been a misclick or an over-prediction, but I do really feel that Terra Blast with the Sun, with Photosynthesis in activation, would really deal a lot of good damage, even if the Amoonguss is no longer a Grass type and it Terra types into Dark.
And I think the reason for that play is maybe catching an Arcanine on the switch in. That Arcanine does have the ability to go for a Snarl, so I could have been trying to play a little bit of a longer game there and sort of cut away Eric's options for the late to mid game there. Would have been nice to see a Terra Fire though, Terra Blast coming into the Iron Hands, maybe doing a little bit more damage, but of course with the way that it played out and with Amoonguss sitting there with Terra Dark, it was just really difficult, it seemed, for David to break through it. With the way that Eric was playing, just that consistent fake out, Terra Dark Amoonguss, you know that you can't get targeted down by too many of David's Pokemon, and you can just sort of, as you said, slow down the match.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to show being able to recognize that win condition is something that is so key, and essentially is the difference between whether you're going to try to make top cut or not, because that is really what it stems and comes down to. David being able to win against Eric 2-0 yesterday. Of course, we did feature on the stream game. Already may give a false sense of confidence in matchup for David, because that was a very... I know that the match was actually closer than what the results suggest. However, that does give a bit of a cushion space for less pressure on Eric's side to actually say, right, okay, let me just ignore all of the additional stuff. Let me focus. I know that what that does. I know what that does. How do I beat it? Right, Spore. I've got to do it. And he did it.
Exactly, and it's definitely worth going back to day one stream. It'll be on Twitch and YouTube to just have a check that out and see exactly how the match went, because clearly there was a lot of different decisions between day one and day two, especially when a player like Eric will go away, do his homework, and come back, thinking like, okay, if I play David in in the Swiss round in day two, if we both make it to the top cut as well and play off in the top 8, I want to have a game plan set up, and
That's it.
I think that's what we saw, because there was that consistent lead with the Iron Hands and the Amoonguss.
There really was, and there was a lot of pivot play to take into consideration, a lot of switches, apologies. I think being able to re-enable the sun weather in order to activate or initiate any sort of strategies with the photosynthesis. Once again, it makes a lot of sense. It puts a lot of pressure out immediately. I think we saw the cool interaction of the Great Tusk after it had been intimidated. It had a boost in its speed and it outsped Iron Bundle, which is something you don't commonly see.
No, not at all. And that Iron Bundle, especially, actually, is something that I want to talk about a little bit more in that match, because it came out in the end of Game 1, I think it was.
Yep.
Game 2.
Yes, it did.
That Eric unfortunately didn't win, and didn't do exactly what Eric needed it to do. I do wonder, well, we saw quite a short Game 3, whether that Iron Bundle was still in the back, or if Eric made a little bit of an adjustment, wanting to be a little bit stronger against that Fluttermane. It didn't pan out that way, and Fluttermane was quite easily dispatched in that Game 3. But that's definitely something that these players will have been thinking about in going to the later stages of the match.
Yeah, and I think we saw the Golden Go wasn't chosen at all from Eric's side of the field, so it sort of gives a lot of respect to the Fluttermane. There could have been another option, I think, of the Arcanine. You did briefly mention it, that Eric could have had in the back, just in case, if it can survive any sort of attacks from Fluttermane, and actually take advantage and of the sun being present. Just go for the Flare Blitz, in which it will be able to survive from the Fluttermane and just potentially pick up that KO straight away.
Well, it did in Game 3,
Exactly.
pick up the KO onto that Fluttermane in the sun. So, yeah, just a really great example of how these interactions, like the sun goes up on David's side of the field and activates those photosynthesis abilities, but actually, there's an Arcanine over there. And these are all the factors that these players have to take into account, especially, in a longer set where you're switching in, you're switching out, you've got that Iron Hands that's really slowing down the game, as well as that Amoonguss for Eric, and you've got to kind of capitalize on those sort of positions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Bellibolt didn't quite make the cut. It did make, it may potentially make the cut, top cut. It's not all over for David, of course. I think he's just got to still try to go ahead and push as much as he can in order to establish it. This was the penultimate round. We do have the final Swiss round, which, of course, we will be featuring soon. But at this point, I believe we've got the winner's interview currently being set up. So just going into... Oh, apparently we've got the interview. It's all ready to go. So we can just go ahead and actually transition to hear from your winner of this round, Eric Rios.
Welcome, Pokemon trainers. I am still shaking from that amazing redemption match between Eric Rios and David Koutesh. We're going to have to keep this one short and sweet because we've got our next round ready and waiting in the rings. But Eric, how are you feeling after getting that revenge match against David?
When I saw the pairings, I thought, okay, I'm playing against David Koutesh. I lost to him yesterday, and I have no matchup against him. His team is so difficult for me. And in the team preview, I was thinking, okay, I can't intimidate Roaring Moon because it's Clear Amulet. I can burn the Roaring because it's Fire Terra type. So I think the only way to win is probably lead with Iron Hands and play with the Spore Among Us, changing the type. So I did that, and yeah, I managed to win. So
I'm glad you mentioned those two Pokemon because they were the two that stood out for us. Iron Hands, particularly in Game 1, got really nice KOs onto Roaring Moon and Fluttermane very easy on. And we saw in Game 2 how that Helping Hand with Torkoal into Fluttermane was so difficult to play around. What were your thoughts approaching that particular combination?
When I saw the Fluttermane plus Torkoal in the back in Game 2, I can't did anything because it's super difficult. Because if I terrorize Among Us to survive the fire moves from Torkoal and Roaring Moon, he lead with Fluttermane, and I can just do anything against that. And okay, when I lead Game 3, I thought, okay, I can win this if I read the switch into Fluttermane and I spore them. And yeah, I did it. So it was so difficult. I don't want to face that in Top Cut again. So let's see.
Yeah, well, it was amazing to see you obviously play yesterday, take that loss, but then come back and be victorious. For my last question, although I've got so many more I wish I could ask you, but one thing particularly for our viewers at home, maybe people who come into Pokemon tournaments and look at a matchup and have that kind of negative feeling of, oh, I maybe can't win this. What advice could you give to someone to overcome that in order to try and get that win?
It's super important to always have no pressure against everything. Just play like you know, and if you are confident with your team, and you will play like the most optimal plays. So just keep calm and play.
Fantastic. So be confident, keep calm, and who knows what might happen. Brilliant. Thank you so much for the advice. We will let you have, obviously, a few moments to gather yourself before your next round. Best of luck in the competition.
Thank you so much.
You're one that we're going to be watching. Don't go anywhere, Pokemon trainers. Of course, this Swiss action is just hotting up even more, and we'll be back with the next round very soon.